Hello. In this video, we are going to examine some of the feedback from the analysis of the results of the 2018 4th grade SCPASS Science test and discuss some of the hard-to-learn science concepts and practices. First, this disclaimer. This presentation makes no claims of specific test items on the 4th grade Science SCPASS test. Also note, throughout this video, there will be times when you will see a URL web address highlighted in red. Feel free to use these to access different online resources related to the content from this video. By the end of this video, we will have done the following. We will have reviewed the findings of the South Carolina Department of Education 2018 SCPASS Science Data Review Report. We will have unpacked specific 4th grade standards singled out in this report. We will have examined sample assessment items aligned to those indicators, and we will have provided time for you to collaborate with your fellow teachers on ways you might address these hard-to-learn science concepts and practices. For students in all grades, the report recommends the following. Students need to read the questions carefully in order to clarify what is being asked. Students also need to read each of the choices carefully in order to help them identify the information that makes one choice correct and the rest wrong. We will be going over some tips on how to help your students develop these skills later in the video. For teachers in all grade levels, the report recommends the following. Teachers need to engage students in using various charts, diagrams, models, and maps when teaching and assessing students. They need to expose students to data represented in various tables and graphs, where students are tasked with identifying, describing, and explaining trends and patterns in the data. They need to have students use and apply the metric system in their measurements. And they need to have students learn the steps and sequence for the scientific investigations. And it is essential that this is done by having students plan and carry out their science investigations. If these sound familiar, it's because each one of these is one of the science and engineering practices that the students should be engaging in every time they learn science. Develop and use models, analyze and interpret data, use mathematics and computational thinking, and plan and carry out investigations. Teachers also need to have students develop their own two-dimensional models and be able to explain the phenomena or processes represented by those models. Teachers need to engage students in the content reading that are connected to graphs, tables, and diagrams. And not only should students be engaging in these science and engineering practices throughout the year, teachers need to explicitly point these out every time they occur in a unit of study. Once more, these represent science and engineering practices that students should be doing throughout their science learning. Develop and use models, and obtain and communicate information. In addition to the more general recommendations, the following recommendations are specific to 4th grade science. Teachers need to engage students in the use and analysis of more authentic, complex, messy data sets aligned to the content they are learning. Students also need to do the following. They need to be analyzing questions. They need to make statements based on what they read and information they get. They need to draw conclusions. They need to propose solutions to problems, and they need to pose arguments. Again, all of these represent different science and engineering practices. Analyze and interpret data, ask questions, construct explanations, define problems and design solutions, and engage in argumentation. And all of these together are parts of obtaining and communicating information. Taken together, these recommendations indicate that it is essential that we, as science teachers, not only engage students in learning science through these practices, but that we also assess our students through the very same science and engineering practices. In addition to the recommendations related to the science and engineering practices, the report points out specific science content performance indicators and concepts that are in need of additional attention. In the weather unit, our 4th graders need to be collecting weather data on a daily and weekly basis, not only for their local weather data, but also for long-term climate data and data from different regions. Additionally, the following terms that come up in the 4th grade science units are often confused by our students. From the light unit, reflection and refraction. From the astronomy unit, rotation and revolution. And from the weather unit, weather and climate. The following are the specific science indicators that are aligned to these often missed concepts. At this point in the video, if you are working collaboratively with your peers, this would be a good time to do a pulse check. Pause the video here and consider the following questions with your fellow teachers. What does this feedback tell you about the importance of the science and engineering practices in both instruction and assessment? What does this feedback tell you about specific areas of content that are deserving of extra attention? Now we are going to practice unpacking some of those hard-to-learn science content performance indicators with an eye towards what this can tell us about not only how we need to be teaching, but how we need to be assessing our students. For each indicator, take a moment to identify the science and engineering practice and the science content defined by the indicator. Go ahead and pause the video if you are working with your peers and try to identify the SEP and the science content. For this indicator from the 4th grade weather and climate unit, the science and engineering practice is analyze and interpret data. And the content is related to describing and predicting local conditions using weather data. What this means for teaching is that our students need to collect, analyze, and interpret multiple types of local weather data. And what this means for assessing is that teachers need to assess students' understanding by giving them examples of real weather data to analyze and interpret. Now let's take a look at an example of an SCPASS style item for this indicator. This item, as well as the 3 following items, is available on the South Carolina Department of Education website, and a short URL to access this bank of 4th grade science SCPASS sample items is available at the end of this video. Take a moment with your teammates and analyze this item. Where do you see the SCP or science and engineering practice in this item? Where do you see the application of science content understanding? Go ahead and pause the video here if you need to. In this item, the table represents not only the data the students will be using to interpret and need to interpret for this question, but also the kind of complex authentic data that they need to see when they are learning these concepts. In this question, we can see that the question is about identifying the pattern in the data. In order to get this correct, students need to analyze and interpret the provided data and apply an understanding of what they have learned in class. This also means they need to have experiences doing this during their learning in class. Now let's look at a performance indicator related to climate data. Take a moment to identify the science and engineering practices and the science content defined by this indicator. Go ahead and pause the video if you are working with your peers. For this indicator from the 4th grade weather and climate unit, the SEP is construct explanations using data, and the content is related to using that data to explain regional climate differences related to the long-term weather conditions. What this means for teaching is that in addition to collecting and analyzing local daily weather data, our students need to collect long-term weather data from different regions, and they need to recognize how that long-term weather data defines the climate. Additionally, students need to be able to explain why these differences in such long-term weather data occur. This also means that students need to be assessed on their ability to describe and explain differences in climate data. Now let's take a look at a sample item. Take a moment with your teammates to analyze this item. Where do you see the SEP in this item? Where do you see the application of science content understanding? Go ahead and pause the video if you need to. In this item, the SEP is evident in the question where the students are being asked to identify the statement or explanation for the regional climate differences represented on the map. The content for this item is represented by the map data that the students need to be able to interpret in order to get the correct answer. Students need to be able to interpret the climate map data and use their interpretation to identify the best explanation for the climate map that the climate map data represents. This means that students need to have this experience in class, not only analyzing and interpreting weather data, but also describing and explaining long-term climate patterns and differences represented in the data. This also illustrates that our students need experiences with weather and climate maps. Now let's take a look at the performance indicator related to Earth's rotation and astronomy. Take a moment to identify the science and engineering practice and the science content defined by this indicator. Go ahead and pause the video if you are working with your peers. For this indicator from the 4th grade astronomy unit, the SEP is construct explanations. and the content is related to the Earth's rotation and how that is related to the phenomenon of day and night. What this means for teaching is that our students need to have experiences that allow them to construct an explanation for the cause and effect relationship between the Earth's rotation and how that results in changes between day and night as a given location on the Earth's surface rotates in and out of Earth's shadow. This also means that students need to be assessed not only on recognizing whether a given location on the globe is experiencing day and night, but also to be able to explain how the Earth's rotation results in the change from day to night and from night to day. Now let's take a look at a sample item. Take a moment with your teammates, analyze this item. Where do you see the SCP in this item? Where do you see the application of science content understanding? Go ahead and pause the video if you need to. In this item, the SCP is evident in the question where students are asked to interpret the model in order to identify the locations experiencing day. The content for this item is represented by the visual model that exemplifies the phenomenon. In order to answer this item correctly, students need to be able to interpret the model and apply their understanding of the day and night phenomenon. This means that our students will need to have learning experiences with modeling rotation and the day and night phenomenon. Note that while this item does not specifically reference rotation, you can extend this by asking students to explain what would need to happen in order for a location on the globe to change from day to night, for which they would need to demonstrate an understanding of rotation. Now let's take a look at a performance indicator related to the Earth's revolution around the Sun. Take a moment to identify the science and engineering practice and the science content defined by this indicator. Go ahead and pause the video if you are working with your peers. For this indicator from the 4th grade astronomy unit, the SCP is develop and use models, and the science content is related to the factors that result in the seasons. What this means for teaching is that students need to be able to use their knowledge and experiences to develop their own models that represent both the 3D nature of the Sun and the Earth and the Earth's movement around the Sun. Furthermore, they need to use their models to describe how the tilt of the Earth's axis, the curve of the Earth's surface, the angle of sunlight, and the Earth's revolution around the Sun all result in seasonal changes and differences experienced on the Earth's surface. This also means that students need to be assessed not only on their ability to identify which seasons might be represented in a visual model of one or more of these factors, but also they need to be assessed on their ability to explain how those factors result in a given season. Please note, this is arguably one of the most complex concepts that our students need to learn in 4th grade science. Now let's take a look at a sample item related to this. Take a moment with your teammates to analyze this item. Where do you see the SCP in this item? Where do you see the application of science content understanding? Go ahead and pause this video if you need to. In this item, the SCP is evident in the question where students are asked to use the model representing 2 different states of the Sun-Earth system, and the content is evident where the students are asked not only to identify the seasons represented by Model 1 and Model 2, but also why the seasons occur in those locations based on the angle of sunlight as it strikes the Earth's curved surface. In order to answer this item correctly, students need to be able to interpret the model and apply their understanding of the Earth's revolution and the Earth's tilted axis in order to not only identify the correct seasons on each model, but also to explain why one is spring and one is summer. This means that our students need to have experiences in developing their own conceptual models of the Sun-Earth system that allow them to describe how revolution, the axis, and the angle of sunlight on the Earth's curved surface all produce the seasons on the Earth. Again, this is arguably one of the most complex and abstract concepts that students have to learn. Let's go ahead and take a look at an indicator related to the behavior of light. Take a moment to identify the science and engineering practice and the science content defined by this indicator. Go ahead and pause the video if you are working with your peers. For this indicator from the 4th grade Light and Sound Energy Unit, the SCP is to develop and use models based on observational data, and the science content is related to the behavior of light as it is absorbed, reflected, and/or refracted. What this means for teaching is that students need to have experiences where they observe light interacting with different materials, resulting in reflection, refraction, and absorption. And they need to analyze and interpret their observational data in order to develop models they can use to exemplify and describe how light behaves in different ways. This means that students need to be assessed on their ability to both use descriptions and observations to develop models, as well as on their ability to use and interpret visual models that exemplify and describe reflection, refraction, and absorption of light. Now let's take a look at one example item related to this. Take a moment with your teammates to analyze this item. Where do you see the SEP in this item? Where do you see the application of science content understanding? Please note that this item is not from the South Carolina Department of Education sample items list. Go ahead and pause the video here if you need to. In this item, the SEP is evident in the question where students are asked to interpret the model that illustrates the phenomenon of light both being absorbed and reflected by the leaves on a tree. And the content is evident where the students need to identify the best description of the phenomenon that results in why the leaves appear green. In order for students to get the correct answer, they need to be able to interpret the model and apply their understanding of how the perception of color results in how much light is absorbed and how much light is reflected by the object. This also means that our students need to have experiences investigating how light interacts with different objects that reflect different colors. This can also include experiences where students observe different colored light and how it appears when they are shined on different colored materials. Let's take a look at another sample item. Again, this item also comes from a bank other than the South Carolina Department of Education's sample items. Where do you see the SEPs on this item? Where do you see the application of science content understanding? Go ahead and pause the video if you need to. In this item, the SEP is evident in the question where the students are asked to interpret the model that illustrates the phenomenon of light being refracted as it passes through the water. And the content is evident where the students need to identify the best description of the phenomenon that results in why the straw appears bent. In order for students to get the correct answer, they need to be able to interpret the model and apply their understanding of how refraction is the phenomenon of light changing direction as it passes through different materials and how that can change something's appearance, such as the straw. This means that our students need to have experiences investigating how light refracts as it passes through different materials, such as lenses as well as water, and how the changes in appearance of objects can be seen through those materials. As you can see, the way our students need to be assessed on their understanding of science concepts and their ability to engage in science practices requires more than merely testing for memorized information. Let's take some time now to collaborate with your peers. Pause the video and in one or more groups, consider the following prompt. What can you do in both teaching and assessing to help clear up the confusion about these topics and better prepare students for achieving the understandings defined by the performance indicators related to the 3 different topics we covered in this video? Analyzing and interpreting weather and climate data, developing and using models to illustrate, describe, and explain how rotation and revolution result in day and night seasons, respectively, and developing and using models based on observations to describe how light interacts with different materials through absorption, reflection, and refraction. As we wrap up this video, it's important that you remember that while we have reviewed 5 specific performance indicators in this video, there are a total of 36 different 4th grade science performance indicators, and they all deserve the same rigorous, authentic learning and assessing experiences. For most of our students, as most of our students will be taking the 4th grade SCPASS Science test online, it is also highly recommended that they have time to experience and become familiar with the online testing environment, as well as the different interactive elements that they will be able to access when they are taking the South Carolina SCPASS Science test online. Your students can follow these directions to access the Online Tools Training, or OTT. It is also suggested that you not wait until closer to the SCPASS Science test date, but rather that you take time over the course of the next several months to allow them to practice these tools. This way, they will not only become familiar with how to use the different tools to help them when they are taking their tests online, but they will also be less likely to become distracted or confused by the online testing environment. Remember, though, that the sampled items on the OTT are not live test items, and they are not 100% aligned with the 4th grade science content that they are learning or that they will see on the genuine SCPASS Science 4th grade test. These items are just used to practice with the OTT. If you are looking for additional resources to help prepare your students for the SCPASS Science test, please explore the following resources. Please note, it is suggested that you not use sample items as quiz or test items, but rather that you use them to extend the learning experience for your students by presenting items to your students as they are learning these concepts and engage them in collaborative, sense-making discussions around the concepts presented in the items. Show your students different items and ask your students to compare the models and illustrations that they see on the items with their own models and illustrations and data sets that they've done throughout their learning experiences. In groups and as a whole class, ask your students to identify key words from the prompts that they might be familiar with or remember from their learning experiences. And instead of just asking your students which one is the correct answer, ask them in groups why one is correct and why the other ones are correct. Give them an opportunity to discuss this together with one another and to share out their ideas and their thinking. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact me at my email address. Thank you for your time, your hard work, and for all that you do for our students. Good luck.